Hi, I'm Lisa Niven Kelly, and today I'd like to show you how to perfect your wire loops. So we're going to do some practicing and we're going to do some troubleshooting so that you can get your loops strong and consistent. That is the key here. So I'm going to be working with round, dead soft wire. You can also use half hard wire. It would just give your chain a little bit more strength. And don't forget, anytime you're cutting and working with wire, safety goggles. Let's bust those out. All right, let's get started. Here are the tools I'll be using to make the basic loops. This is my cutter, and I like a real nice flush cutter. This particular cutter is a razor flush cutter, so it gives me a really nice flat cut, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. My chain nose, smooth jaws inside, nice and flat. I use this for holding and manipulating wire as well as making tight angles. Round nose plier, this is a short round nose and we're going to use this one for today, but ever if you needed to make larger loops, you could bump it up to a long round nose, and it has a larger base here available to make larger loops with your wire. Before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about my cutter. This is my favorite cutter. It's a Tronex razor flush cutter. It has its own bed at home with a quilt and a pillow, and I tuck it in at night. I take good care of this cutter. Because what can happen is you can dull or even break the blades of your cutter if you don't use it properly. So I would just follow the information that you read on the site where you buy these or what might come with the box. And what we recommend is out at the tip not to cut any thicker than 22 gauge because you could break it. So with my 20 gauge that I'm using today, if I need to just come in and cut a piece off, I am just going to cut a little further back in the blades, back towards the joint, and that will help preserve the very precious and fragile tip of this cutter. Here's what we're going to use to start practicing the basic loops. We have here 20 gauge wire. We're going to start with copper. They're both dead soft and round. We're going to use some copper to practice a whole bunch till we perfect this technique. Then we're going to move into our sterling, which is also, again, 20 gauge, dead soft and round. Now, I like to use 20 gauge for this size loop. It gives me a nice strong loop. You can go 20 gauge or thicker. If you need to use a smaller wire, though, you need to make your loops smaller. Otherwise, they just won't be strong enough. Towards this finished project here, we're going to be using 6mm bicone crystals. You can use any beads for this. That's our point here, is to learn how to link beads. So choose what you want, but for this, remember the bead needs to fit on a 20 gauge wire. So the hole needs to be big enough to accommodate that wire. First thing we need to do is start with a flush cut on this wire. So you want to make sure that both ends of your wire are always cut flush. So when your loop comes around, it comes together with the flat end of the wire, not a beveled end that will come together like this. Danger, danger, things could slip through, chain could fall apart. Bad. So we're going to start with a flush cut. I've got my cutter right here. This is the flush side of my cutter. So remember, with a flush cutter, there's a flush side and a not so flush side. This side here is going to leave your wire beveled. If you were to cut it like here, what's going to happen is this piece of trash will come off straight, and this end that we want to be working on will come off beveled. So that's why we want to start with the flush side of our cutter and just cut the smallest amount of the wire off that you can, because we don't want to waste it if we were working in our sterling, right? So now I've got a flush cut done with my cutter, and it's round nose time. So I'm going to show you how to make this loop, and then I'm going to come back and show you some problem solving. So as you're learning to make this loop, I want you to see it all the way through on this side, make your loop, we're going to kink it back, and then trim it off, toss it aside, and do it again. So do a whole bunch of single side loops so you can really perfect this before we go tackle the other side. Let's just get that practice in. So to make this loop, I need to decide where on my round nose I want to be. This will determine the size of my loop. So I usually work a little bit towards the back, right about here on these short round nose. You can mark it with a Sharpie if you want. It might rub off, so you just have to continue to mark it every now and then. But I'm just going to eyeball it here. and I'm going to grab that wire between the jaws of my plier. You don't want it poking up where you can feel it. You see how when I turn it to this angle, you can't see the tip at all? That's really important. If it's sticking up at all, you're going to have an egg shape, and I'll show you that in a bit. Let's show you how to do it the right way first. So let's roll away from you, loosen your grip on the tool, bring it back, squeeze, continue to do that as many times as you need to until the wire comes around and touches in this lovely P shape. So now we need to shift this loop so that it's centered on this wire. Now I'm going to come in with my chain nose and use just the tip. I'm going to put the plier one side in the loop, one side on the outside, right at the neck. Can you see that? So I'm not underneath like this. I'm using just the tip, and I'm right here. And I'm going to rock it back. Rock it back. So there we have an eye pin that isn't perfectly centered. So we're going to come in, rock it forward. I got a little crazy there. There we go. So when you rock it back, it leaves a tiny bit of an opening there. You can either leave that like that, because you're most likely, when you're building a chain, going to be opening and close this, and you can make sure everybody's closed up at the end of the chain. But if you needed to close it perfectly now, you just come in with your chain nose, grab down here, not way up here, because we don't want to distort it, and rock it back and forth as I'm pushing it in to close. So rock back and forth, push it in. And there we've got the first side of our loop. So let's do some problem solving. I will show you some things that may have gone wrong and show you how to fix it. Let's talk about some problem solving here. Let's start again with the flush cut. I think we got that part down. Now coming in with the round nose. Let's pretend everything is fine and dandy. You have it between the jaw of your pliers, but you don't notice that it's poking up even the tiniest bit. You see that little bit right there? Well, let's pretend we don't notice. We're gonna make our loop, la la la, and it's a P, and you look at your P and it's not so much a P. It's got this flat part right there. That is because the bit of the wire was poking out of your pliers. Come in with your round nose and place it back on the part that you were working on, not up here, and just continue that loop. And now it's nice and round, ready to be kinked to centered. One more thing that can go wrong, let's start again, our flush cut here, is everything is fine and dandy. You've got your wire between the jaws of your plier for reals this time. And you loop away from yourself, and when you can't go anymore with your right arm, you open the jaw of the plier and scoot it back. But did you see where my wire went? I was here, and I went up here and continued. And then you end up with a little bit of a weird shape. So let's just remember, when you're rolling away from yourself, keep the wire on that part of the plier. That's why it's nice to mark it, so that you end up with your nice round P. One last thing, if you squeeze too hard with your round nose, you're going to dent up your wire. And that's what people do often when they're starting this technique or any technique. They tend to squeeze too hard. So let's do that. I'm going to do that here. I'm going to roll. I'm squeezing really hard with my round nose. And what happens is it squishes your wire. Can you see all those dents on the outside? That's because I was really, really giving it the death grip. All you need to do is hold this wire enough that it will move it with your plier. Don't get all crazy with the grip, or you'll end up with some dented wire. Now, before we get started on the second loop, I want to address the question that I get a lot, which is folks wonder how long they should cut this wire to make this little link, right? What I want to encourage you to do is just to work off of a long wire, because if you're constantly cutting your wire at, say, 2 inches, and you make this link and you end up with a 1/2 inch waste, you're going to be wasting a lot of wire. And these days, Metal is pretty expensive, so let's not do that. So you have a choice of either cutting off what I refer to as a workable piece of wire, you know, a foot or so, or you can work right off of a spool or a coil. If that's the case though, and you want to go this route, don't forget to slide your bead on first before making that first loop. I'll tell you why. Because if you make your first loop, it's hard to guesstimate how long the bead is, how long you need for the second loop, and trim. Whereas you'll see in a second when we make our second loop, if you have your bead on your wire, you have your first loop, you scoot up your bead, you can pretty much very easily guesstimate how long to cut for that second loop. Make sense? All right, let's learn how to make that second loop. Here's the first side of our loop and our bead, and we just made 20 of these and tossed them aside. That's why this looks so perfect. Is that about right? Is that how that went for you? All right, so we've got our loop. Now I just want to point out that for this practice, I'm working on a workable piece of wire, so I didn't preload my bead. I'm just going to slide them on the back here. Bring it around. You probably want to pull out the kinks of your wire here. Try to straighten it a little. Makes the bead slide on easier. And bring it up. Okay, so I know from making this size loop a gazillion times that I trim this wire at about 1/2 inch. Now that's just this loop that I make a lot. You might prefer a smaller loop, a bigger loop, and this measurement will vary depending on that. But for this size loop, let's cut it at about 1/2 inch. You could get out your ruler, but I'm just going for it. All right. You noticed I used the flush side of my cutter, so it's nice and flat. Now coming in with my round nose. We want to do the same on this side. I'm going to start up at the top, and I'm going to make sure that the wire is between the jaw of my pliers, tucked in, not sticking up, but tucked in right there. I'm going to do the same thing, roll away from myself while pushing this wire against my plier to achieve that nice round loop. And here we go. Continue, continue, continue. And you want the wire to come around and touch at a P, which it looks like mine did not. So here's your first problem-solving lesson. I cut this wire, I'd like to say on purpose to show you this lesson, but I didn't, a little bit short. So I came out a little bit short. So I want to open it just a little bit. So I'm going back in with my round nose, open it up. See how it's open? I'm going to come in with my round nose and grab it at the tip at a slightly smaller part of my round nose. It's not really going to look all that different when this loop is done. But see, I'm grabbing it at the tip. I don't know if I can really show you that. I'm not grabbing it in the bend, but way out at the tip because I need this bend to move. And just with a little bit of force, turning it. There we go. That's what we wanted. You want the P to come around and touch right at the bead. Now I'm going to come in with my chain nose and kink it back. So at this spot, you have to, again, we're going to hold here, just like we did on the first side, but be careful when you rock it back because if you do it a little too much, this side of your plier can whack the bead and crack it. So just dook right there. So you see I had to do a little bit of problem solving, but the loops are really, really similar. After doing this a couple of times, you will get that second cut right. So let's do it again, a little more close up this time. Let's practice that again, but first I want to answer your next question, which is, for this next link, do I have to make that loop directly into the partner link there? And the answer is no. We're going to make a whole bunch of these links and then link them together. So this guy can just get put in the finished pile. So I've got my first loop here and I have strung my bead on. Now let's learn a little lesson, which might be take out a ruler, Lisa, instead of guesstimate, but let's just guesstimate here and trim that guy. That does look a little bit more like 1/2 inch. Come in with my round nose and let's make that second half. Now before I make this loop, I want to point out to you what I just do naturally, which is when I make this loop, I let this side sort of face this direction where I'm looking down the hole, so that when I make the second loop, they end up perpendicular to each other. You do have a little bit of play to adjust those at the end, and I'll show you that in a second, but if you like that figure 8 style link, then you can just naturally have that happen by the way you position it before you roll your second loop. Roll away from you, loosen, bring it on back, and touch. There we go, right there at the base of the bead. Come in with my chain nose and give it a little kink. All right, that guy is looking good. But you'll see he's kind of, it's come in now. You are the boss of this wire. Get your pliers, if you can hang on to this thing, and kink it up, so now he's no longer falling. And if your loops came out not perpendicular, you can grab it either with 2 chain nose or with your hand if the wire's thin enough, and just shift it. You have a little bit of play there. Maybe you wanted your loops to be on the same side, or maybe you want them perpendicular. If you did that all day, it would snap, but a little adjusting is fine. We have got one more problem solving to do. So we covered what to do if you cut it too short. Now we need to cover what to do if you cut it too long. So let's cut it pretending like we don't know that it's too long. We're coming in with our round nose and busting out that loop. Look at me, I know how to make loops. Oh my gosh, what happened? That big long neck, that's not okay. So we need to fix that. And we're going to guesstimate here the length of that neck. We're going to cut that length, that measurement, off of our loop. It's a little bit of guesstimation, but after practicing this a couple times, you are going to get it. So I'm going to come in with my cutter, and I'm thinking right about there. Now I've got this hook, and I'm going to come and place that hook on my round nose and continue my loop. And hopefully it will touch, yay, right where it needs to be. So this problem is a good problem to have, because you can still make the loop on one side the same size as the loop on the other side. Now you've got a nice big pile of links in front of you, whether you've gone for it, moved into your sterling, or you've got a couple of practice pieces here. It's time to link these bad boys together. So let me talk first about opening and closing these links. So let's say this is your loop. You want to open it just like a jump ring by pulling it out this way. So pulling it out this way, not this way. So you don't want to open your loops like this, otherwise it will likely distort when you go to put them back together. You want to open it by pulling one out this way and then bringing it back like that. So let's start doing that with these guys. I'm going to start with this one link here, and I'm going to pull him open. I'm going to use my chain nose, and I grab just down at the tip here. You don't want to hold way up here and distort it weird. Just hold it at the tip like this and pull it out just slightly. You also don't want to pull it way open like that, because that's just overkill, and it will likely distort when you put it back. So let's just pull them out enough to slide his friend right in there. And then we're going to grab the same spot and rock it back and forth as I'm pushing it closed. I take this opportunity to check the friend that just got scooted in there. Since we're not going to need to open and close this guy, just make sure that it's nice and closed as well. Now up here, grab this guy, open it slightly, and slide one in. And close, check his friend. See where I'm headed here? So take a look at the finished piece that I was able to make with my 20 gauge sterling and my bicones. And to add a clasp at the end, I've just found this ready-made clasp and opened my last loop here. Let's see, let's back it out here. So when I bought the clasp, it was like this. I made my own chain, and you just open it just like adding any other link. Insert the clasp and close it up nice and tight. Same thing happened over here to the other side of this toggle. And you're all set to walk around town and brag about your very own linked bracelet.